When immersing yourself in a new culture, learning the language is one of the most important aspects. Until you can communicate, it's hard to feel like you're really in it, or can even participate or ask questions, like being in a book club without knowing how to read.
I say, how's the book coming?
Oh, pretty good.
You haven't read a page, have you?
No.
Yeah.
Freestyle Footbag very much has its own language, but when you don't know it, trying to talk to someone about the sport will leave you feeling like this. To get you up to speed and into the conversation, today we're going to learn the most important parts of reading and writing the language of Freestyle Footbag. The language of Freestyle Footbag is mostly centered around tricks and how to describe and name them. There's a lot to cover for this topic, so we're going to take it in steps. First, we'll learn how to identify and name the basic building blocks that tricks are built from. Then we'll learn how to use those to identify and name the core set of tricks. And finally, we'll put all the concepts together to learn how to identify and name almost any standard footbag trick. But before we really get into it, let's just start with the most basic question. Part 1, what even is a footbag trick? There are thousands of tricks in the sport that come in all kinds of shapes and varieties, but almost all standard ones follow this basic formula. A trick begins with the bag touching a part of the body. The bag is set into the air. Some junk happens in the middle, and the bag returns to touch a part of the body. Most of our focus today will be here. In the language of the sport, tricks are like words. These moments where the bag comes into contact with the body are like spaces, and these long strings of tricks are like sentences. In this video, we're only going to focus on single tricks, but even without knowing any more detail than that, you can watch pretty much any Freestyle Footbag video and get the basic idea of what's happening. And just like it's not practical to memorize every word in the dictionary, I can't possibly teach you what every single footbag trick looks like and what it's called, but what I can do is teach you the basics of how tricks are built and how to identify them, starting with Part 2, Basic Components. Before we learn any words/tricks, we have to be able to understand and identify the components that they're made from. These components are basic bodily movements that happen in relation to the bag. There are only a handful, and we can use them to generally describe almost any standard trick. The simplest trick component, and the one that's guaranteed to be in every trick, is a contact, when the bag literally comes into contact with a part of the body. Contacts keep the bag off the ground so that we can do tricks while it's in the air. Once the bag is in the air, the most common components seen are dexes, motions where the legs circle the bag. Tricks can have multiple dexes, or none even, but dexes are basically what Freestyle Footbag is all about, so most tricks you see are likely to have at least one. The easiest way to identify dexes is to watch for the bag disappearing behind a leg. The final two basic components are completely self-explanatory: spinning, when the entire body rotates, and ducking, when the head dips underneath the bag. And that is the four basic components that most Freestyle Footbag tricks are built out of: contacts, dexes, spins, and ducks. Here's a summary and cheat sheet of the basic components. And now that we can identify them on their own, the simplest way to describe a trick is to list all of the components in the order that they happen. Let's practice by identifying the components of some simple tricks. Now, obviously doing this in real time will take practice, but the more you do it, the more quickly you'll recognize components. And while this process is super important to understanding the sport, it's too general to really use as a way to describe tricks. Notice that these two have the same basic components on paper. This leads us to Part 3, Component Detail. To more accurately describe what we're seeing in a trick, we need to identify components with more detail. With this extra detail, we'll be able to accurately describe almost any standard footbag trick. There's a lot of information in this part, and I've done my best to keep it to the essentials on screen. For the rest of the video though, you'll occasionally see a footnote for additional info in the description if you're interested. So every trick has some kind of contact, but the specific contact used will affect what the trick actually is. The most basic contact type is a kick, but pretty much the only type you see in standard freestyle is a stall. For the basics of reading the sport, you really only have to know two stalls. Toe stall on the toe surface of the shoe, and clipper stall on the inside surface of the shoe with the legs in a crossbody position. For dexes, there are a few different ways we can more specifically identify how the legs move. The first is the direction that the leg circles the bag, either in to out, where the leg circles the bag from the inside of the body towards the outside, or out to in, where the leg circles from the outside towards the inside. Dexes also come in two different movement types: hippie, where the leg motion comes from the hip, or leggy, where the dex motion comes from the knee. Finally, dexes can be done normally or symposium. A normal dex is done with the dex leg in the air and the other leg on the ground to support it. A symposium dex is done in a big single leg jump, and both legs are in the air at the same time. The symposium leg jumps off the ground, dexes the bag, and lands back on the ground while the other leg stays in the air the entire time. For ducking, the most important detail to identify is a duck versus a dive, which have slightly different head movements. In a duck, the head immediately dips under and towards the bag, making a half circle. In a dive, the head first goes over the bag before cutting back under it in the opposite direction, creating more of a full circle. The faces of a trick are the vertical directions that the bag moves through, which we can pair with a component to say exactly when it happens. Uptime, while the bag is moving up, midtime, while the bag reaches its peak, and downtime, while the bag is moving down. In the uptime phase, you will mostly see dexes and spins. In midtime, you will mostly see ducks, but could also see things like spins and dexes. And in downtime, you will almost exclusively see dexes. The side of a component is which half of the body is doing the current one as compared to the half that did the previous component, either same side / near, or opposite side / far. Just mentally draw a line down the middle of the body and see if components stay in one half or move to the other. And finally, there's paradox, a special kind of side term that for the most part is clipper to op index, though there are exceptions to be discussed another time. Paradox is not a necessary term to write a trick name, but you'll definitely encounter it when reading trick names, so it's necessary to have at least a basic understanding of it. Okay, that was a lot of detail. Here's a summary of everything we just covered. Now let's revisit the trick examples from the previous part and rewrite them with as much component detail as we can. And here's some more complex tricks for more practice. At this level of detail, we can be super precise when describing and identifying tricks. Notice that these tricks, which had identical basic components, now have enough detail to distinguish them on paper. But you might also notice that describing tricks like this is quite a mouthful, especially as they get more complex, which finally leads us to Part 4, Trick Names. Just like with a language, knowing how to describe and identify parts of words is fundamental to reading and speaking, but to actually communicate, you need to have at least a basic vocabulary. In our case, this is where actual trick names come in, which, as I said before, are the words of the Footbag language. And just like words are defined by other words, tricks are defined by other tricks until we get to such a basic level that there's an assumed understanding. And now that we have all the tools we need to understand them, we can learn the basic vocabulary of tricks, which we can use to name pretty much any standard one in the entire sport. If there's one thing in this video that you should really study and commit to memory, it's this set of trick names and how to identify them. And that really is all the trick names you need to know at a minimum. Toe, clipper, around the world, orbit, legover, mirage, pickup, illusion, butterfly, osis, whirl, and swirl. And here's the final cheat sheet for the core tricks. And now with this small set of tricks, we have enough info to give almost any trick a basic technical name. A technical name is just the name formed by writing out the simpler tricks and trick fragments inside a more complex one, including any concepts we covered earlier like phases, ducking, symposium, etc. A technical name is like a trick's dictionary definition, and since tricks are defined with other tricks, there are usually several technical names you could come up with for any given one. And let's bring back our example tricks again and rewrite them using everything we've learned. I'm also going to sneak in some common shorthands to smooth out the technical names, but I think you'll pick up on those without explanation. At this point, we have enough vocabulary to have a basic footbag conversation. You could stop learning names right here and be totally understandable, but you're going to be able to communicate faster and simpler the more trick names you know, which leads us to the final part of today's video. Part 5, building your vocabulary. So the basic technical names we just did are a solid way to name any trick, and you'll be totally understandable to any player. But many tricks do have a shorthand nickname, and without knowing the 50 to 100 most common ones, you'll constantly be asking, what is that, when talking to other players. In order to help you build out your vocab, I've put up a trick dictionary along with this video, and we're going to close out today's lesson by looking at 2 examples of how to use it. Looking up a technical name to learn its nickname, and looking up a nickname to learn its technical name. Let's bring back this trick from our examples, which we currently know as spinning, same side, miraging, op, osis, and use the trick dictionary to look up simpler ways to name it. Let's start with the downtime fragment on its own, miraging, op, osis. In the trick dictionary, let's search for miraging and go through the entries until we find something that looks like miraging, op, osis. As we've already seen, there are many ways to name and define tricks, so searching for multiple terms might not find a match. And here we find the entry for downtime miraging far osis, which is what we're looking for under a slightly different definition, and we see that it has the nickname of torque. Let's go back to our downtime trick and replace miraging op osis with torque. And also sub that into our full trick name, which we can now call spinning same side torque. Now let's work on the uptime fragment of the trick and try to simplify spinning same side as much as we can. Heading back to the trick dictionary, we can go to the sets tab to look up names for uptime components. Searching for spinning, we eventually find the entry for the spinning set, which has a nickname for spinning same side, gyro. Back to our trick, let's rename the set as gyro, and rename our full trick as gyro torque. Now, gyro torque is a fine way to name this trick, but let's try to get it even simpler. Back to the tricks tab in the dictionary, let's search for gyro torque. And we find that entry, which has the nickname of Mobius. Back to our trick one final time, we can make the last substitution and be left with just Mobius, which is the nickname of and simplest way to name this trick. Because of the way footbag tricks are constructed and named, there are usually several ways to name them, especially more complex ones. All of these ways to name Mobius are technically correct and understandable, and there's nothing wrong with using a longer technical name if you don't know a nickname. It might just sound a little funny to someone who's more used to the nickname, like saying, I require sustenance, instead of just, I'm hungry. Not every trick has a shorthand nickname. Some of them are named like at this level, and some really uncommon and complex ones are named like at this level. Unfortunately, there's no magic way to know which tricks have nicknames and which just have simple technical names, other than trial and erroring your way through the dictionary or asking someone more experienced. But just by reading about the sport and talking with other players, you'll pick up on the most common nicknames and can focus on memorizing those. And this process of using the dictionary might seem tedious, but it is cumulative. Every instance of spinning same side can be replaced with gyro, every instance of miraging op osis can be replaced with torque, and every instance of gyro torque, and all the other ways we named it, can be replaced with Mobius. That means when you encounter new things, like spinning same side legover, toe same side miraging op osis, or even something crazy like atomic gyro miraging op osis, you've already done the work to be able to simplify those to gyro legover, toe same side torque, and atomic Mobius. As some homework and extra practice, I'll leave the remaining example tricks for you to simplify. I've given you the first letter and letter count of the simplest names of each trick so that you can check your work. And remember that you might discover multiple other correct ways to name each of these. Now let's do the reverse and work a nickname down to a technical name. Let's say you see the trick name Smoke out in the wild and want to figure out what it is without seeing video or asking someone for a simpler name. First, let's find the entry in the dictionary for smoke, and it has the technical definition of pixie far drifter, which we don't understand yet. Let's again work backwards and start with the downtime fragment, drifter. Going to the drifter entry, we find the definition of downtime miraging far clipper, which we can understand. Now let's visualize it. Drifter is a mirage dex, followed by an op clipper. When you're more experienced with this, you'll be able to quickly imagine what something like this looks like, but for today, here's the complete trick. Now let's head back to the dictionary to look up pixie in the sets tab. Finding that entry, we see the definition of uptime around the world, which again is in terms we can understand. Here's the visualization of a pixie set. And now we can combine everything together to get our final trick. Pixie plus drifter equals smoke. And that, finally, concludes this long lesson on the language of Freestyle Footbag. For reference, I'll leave links for all of the summary cheat sheets, the trick dictionary, and the source videos in the description. You can also check out the glossary, which has every term we learned today, including many more. The trick dictionary is definitely missing a bunch of entries, so feel free to message me whenever you find something I missed and I'll get it in there. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you find this useful, and that with study and practice, you feel confident to join in on the Freestyle Footbag conversation.